Tēnā koutou katoa, ko hui hui mai nei, tēnei rā. Ngā mahi nui ki te iwi kāinga o te pōti, tēnā koutou, ki ngā rangatira, tēnā koutou, me ngā manuhiri, nau mai, hara mai. Ko tuhirangi te maunga, ko kākanui te awa, ko ngā te whātua o kaipara, te iwi, ko ngā te rango te hapu, ko kākanui te marae, ko te kora te wharenui, nō reira tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Leonie Hayden tōku ingoa no Godfery Media, ko te kai wāwahi, kai whakahaere o mana. My name's Leonie Hayden and I'm the editor of Mana magazine. It's only a role that I've been in for 1 year. It was actually 1 year yesterday. It was my anniversary of joining the Mana team. Mana's a 23-year-old publication that was founded by a group of Māori journalists and broadcasters, most notably Derek Fox, who felt that there were Māori stories that were not being told in New Zealand media. As well as Mana magazine, they were all heavily involved in television, the early stages of getting Māori broadcasts on television and on the radio, and they were all involved at every level of what later became Māori television. So it's a heck of a legacy to try and carry on. In about 2014, the Mana Productions crew found themselves a little bit outmoded by where media was heading. They were all sort of in their 50s and 60s. They weren't super plugged in with where the younger audiences were for Mana. So they made the wise decision of giving the license to publish Mana to a company called Godfery Media. Now, Godfery Media also published New Zealand Geographic, another 20-something odd old magazine, 25 years old, I think it is. And Godfery Media is an organisation that is very clued up in how to present media to the widest audience possible. And so right from the very beginning, when they took over at Mana, there was a big emphasis on a digital audience, a younger audience. So as well as making the magazine the most beautiful publication that we possibly could, we also developed a new website and an app, and did a lot of research into where young Māori audiences are in the digital age. We found that there are more young Māori than there are other youth demographics, and Māori are also more connected as a demographic than anyone else in New Zealand. So it made sense that our social media platforms were going to take a priority, as well as, you know, an excellent printed product. So that's where, that's sort of roughly my background. My personal background has been in pop culture media, music and film. And so this scary new world of Māori media / new media for Māori, I feel like as much as I'm trying to sort of spearhead this thing, I'm also learning as I go. And I'm actually also hoping to learn a lot today as well. So yeah, kia ora, thanks for having me.
Thanks, Leonie. We'll move on just quickly to Morgan Godfery.
Yeah, kia ora tātou, ko pūtau ki te maunga, ko rangitai ki te awa, ko mātātua te waka, ko Ngāti Awa te iwi, ko Morgan Godfery aho. That's just a different way of saying I'm not a Wellingtonian. And yeah, I've sort of had a weird road to the media because I'm trained as a lawyer. I work for a union, but if I'm a specialist in anything, it's Indigenous politics, which is probably my passion, and which I write about freelance. So, where is it? I'm showing this off pretty much wherever I go.
What a show.
Which is, yeah, the most recent thing I've done is a Māori political essay for Overland, which is an Australian journal. And what was the other recent one? I recently wrote for Metro and do some freelance stuff for The Guardian, and it's all on Indigenous politics, really, which is quite an interesting dynamic, I think, that really I get published more overseas than in New Zealand, that there's not an appetite for Indigenous politics in New Zealand media, which is, yeah, I find weird, and I hope we'll discuss today.
Thanks, Morgan. I just realized I didn't introduce myself. So my name is Vijay Devadas. I'm from the University of Otago in the Department of Media, Film and Communication. and I work around Indigenous issues and politics and media, and recently published a book called The Fourth Eye, Māori Media in New Zealand, again published overseas at University of Minnesota Press in 2013. And one of the key things we found when putting the book together was we found it difficult to find scholars writing about Māori and new media, which I hope we also can talk about in terms of an absence of discussion of this area. Could I just pick up on a few issues that we've just come through in your introductions? Leonie, just perhaps going to you, you talk about the Māori new media terrain as scary. Say a few more words about what's scary about that terrain at the moment.
Well, I guess from a completely business point of view, publishing, if you don't receive any kind of funding, a lot of my job as an editor has to do with sales revenue, and you need that to stay alive. And new media is kind of an unknown quotient in that regard. We sometimes struggle to prove to advertisers that this is where they should be, where they should have a stronger presence. So that can be quite scary, because if you're not getting the numbers that you need to prove that, and they're just not interested. You know, there's someone else with a bigger hit rate that they can go to for those needs. But not only that, the digital landscape changes. It feels like weekly, if not monthly, and also, as you know, a lot of the bigger newspapers and magazines, say like in the States, sort of also struggle to fit into the new media landscape. They come out with these huge tomes, like the New York Times Innovation Report, which, as we printed it out at work, double-sided pages, and it's about that thick. And so they really sort of terrify you into thinking that this digital era that we're in, and this sharing of information it's going too fast for any of us to keep up with. And whilst it's probably not at all true, it just can sometimes feel like, as an editor, it can sometimes feel like it's hard to know where to start.
Sure. Morgan, I see you nodding away, and I think, from your point of view of being interested in Indigenous politics, how do you see new media and its terrain as offering potential or otherwise?
The economics of it are very difficult, and I think as a writer, if you want to make money out of that sort of thing or make a living, you need to find an institution that's going to support you, and finding that institution in new media is really difficult. You can't exactly go to BuzzFeed and pitch an essay on Indigenous politics in South America. They're never going to take it. It's new for writers, and it's new for business managers as well, and I don't think anyone's really found the right mix yet, or found the way to make it work.
Sure thing. I think this is one of the kind of conundrums we face, especially so in light of the kind of NSA security, the other kinds of issues that permeate as well. So from a business, politics, power landscape, the new media does seem to be terrifying, as you rightly put it. Rob, do you want to say a few words about your kind of involvement in New Zealand media and journalism particularly, and whether reflecting back on 40 years, plus whether maybe I should have said that. Long history, very tumultuous history in this country, so which you've been involved in. How's it served in relation to where modern journalism is today?
Yeah, sure. I think it is. I agree. I think it is quite scary, the movement or the change in newspapers at the moment, change in media at the moment. As I say, my background is in newspapers, and I see them facing really dramatic change, really struggling for advertising, struggling for readership, and they're desperately trying to reinvent themselves every day to be relevant to younger people especially. I think some media organisations have adapted quite quickly, and they do have a presence, they do have an internet presence, greater readership. My concern is that a lot of media outlets like newspapers, magazines, are shedding staff quite fast at the moment. We knew the change was coming. We could see it 20 years ago. We could see it still coming 10 years ago. But in the last few years, it's been really, really fast as newspapers are shutting down. A lot of regional outlets. A lot of community newspapers are vanishing. We're getting survival of the fittest a little bit, and it's the big publications with still have an advertising market that are surviving, but shedding staff. A lot of specialist staff are vanishing. You're getting more general staff. Now they want a journalist who can take pictures, take videos, do everything. Probably not a specialist in any particular field. So that's probably what I notice most is that change, yeah. The speed of that change.
Sure, absolutely. And I think, one wonders if that kind of decline in newspaper reporters, journalists, doing journalistic work might actually engender new forms of journalism and writing in new media platforms. Margaret, do you want to say something about?
I think the general decline of media is probably a product of neoliberalism, in the sense that media is no longer a place where you come for community. It's really a consumer act when you sort of consume newspapers. If you go to the New York Times, you're committing probably a consumer act rather than going to the New York Times to find a community. And I think that's the radical potential of new media, is that you can build these new communities. I think with what Mana's doing online, there's a real potential to rebuild the Māori community that used to be around the old Mana magazine, but kind of fell off back in 2008, 2009.
I mean, I think the word community really sums up the difference between Māori media and mainstream media as well, because we're community-based people, we're community-minded, and so therefore our media reflects that. And, it's not this is the news, we're reporting it at you.
That's right.
More often than not, especially with Mana, if we post a story, then most of our readers, or at least our online community, find themselves within that story, and that's a really important aspect of Māori media, I think, and that's our real strength and our real point of difference.
Absolutely. I think, a key difference, for example, in addition to Mana magazine, would be Māori television, and thinking of the kinds of coverage items, the programs that they put on screen do reflect a different kind of commitment. So in that regard, could we collectively agree that modern journalism, from its economic, neoliberal, mainstream perspective, is not serving Māori audiences? Or do you think this is too strong a position to take? I open to you.
Well, I don't. I think that whilst we're seeing improvements in reporting on Māori issues and Māori stories, there's always going to be a tikanga that we come at journalism and stories that is going to, it's shaped differently. And I mean, a state broadcaster or a New Zealand Herald, with the hits that they need and the readership that they need, needs must won't be able to embody that. I mean, I feel like that's a shame for them, as well as a shame for us, because we'd be discussing earlier that Māori culture is New Zealand culture, and I mean, I very much would like Mana to be something that absolutely everyone in New Zealand can pick up and wants to pick up and is interested in, but we're still a niche audience. That's how we're termed, and I don't think mainstream. I don't know. I mean, I couldn't say what it is that needs to sort of change within mainstream media, or even if anything needs to change. But I don't necessarily think they serve us as well as we can serve ourselves.
Absolutely.
I think it's still an aspect of othering, I suppose, in the mainstream media, where Māori issues are compartmentalised and they're covered to tick a box rather than sort of conceptualised as a New Zealand issue. Māori issues are New Zealand issues, and they should be conceptualised in that broad way. But and I think a lot of newspaper editors and a lot of TV producers still approach sort of Māori news and Māori issues as a commercial act. So it's, are we going to get clicks if we run this story on the successful whānau water family, or are we going to get eyes in front of these advertisements if we run this story on the Māori prisoners? So I think when you bring that sort of commercial considerations in, it can sometimes corrupt the process, and it really works against best serving Māori interests.
Especially because for a lot of those mainstream media outlets, they're going to get more clicks if they do a story on how miserably whānau ora is failing.
Absolutely.
Or how terrible Māori statistics
Absolutely.
are for Māori prisoners.
That's right.
So that's actually something that very much works against us.
Yes.
And it's something that I think is another really important role of Māori media is to constantly be shining a light on those same issues, but from a completely Māori perspective and from a different angle.
Yeah. I think historically, I don't think newspapers and mainstream media have served Māori well at all, especially through that period. I worked through that Treaty of Waitangi claims through the 1990s, and it wasn't good. It really polarised people, and a coverage or newspaper coverage at that time I thought was pretty poor, really.
Sure, and I think I totally agree with you that two things come out from our discussion. The kind of economic force continues to almost endorse racialized and stereotyping form of reportage that took place. When I wrote an article on the October 2007 raids and its coverage on New Zealand Herald and mainstream New Zealand newspapers. It was quite appalling, totally, because what they underscored was a simple equivalence between Maori and terrorism, and there was and I've met non-Maori activists in Wellington who have been involved, and they were never part of the reportage, and this is where I think mainstream media totally fails Maori communities. Just to also speak to the other point you make, the kind of categorization. And you spoke about it, the kind of cataloguing of Maori media as special interests. And we spoke about it briefly just then, before the panel as well. I think that itself is a key issue to think about. Yeah. Do you want to speak about Mana's own recategorization recently?
Yeah, so I was just telling these guys before the panel that the Magazine Press Association have decided to recategorise some of their magazines for the purposes of the upcoming magazine, the MPA Awards, I guess. And so while Mana has, in previous years, been in the News and Current Affairs category, this year we've been shifted into a special interest category. So instead of being in a category against the likes of North and South and Metro and The Listener, I'm going to be going up against Home and Garden magazine. And this feels like a really big step backwards for me.
Yes.
It's also really a clear sign that that this is an industry, the publishing industry of magazines specifically, that may be a little bit outdated. It is quite a patriarchy, that much I've known from working in publishing for a really long time. But this is sort of final proof of that fact that that maybe, I mean, I don't necessarily see it as like symptomatic of like the wider media, but the fact that sort of someone has categorised us in that way in 2015 means that sort of all these great steps forward that we've made, there's always going to be someone that forces you to take a step back, and that is, I mean, that's just the journey for Māori. That has been our journey for the last couple of 100 years. You make great advancements and you're pulled back, and you make the advancements and you're pulled back, but it can still be very galling, in this day and age, to find that someone's turned you into a special interest.
Absolutely.
Rather than something that you see as culturally relevant to the entire country. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, this process of categorization for an award is not just that, is it? It's also deeply implicated in the way Maori actually thought through and conceived as part of the citizens, rightful citizens of this country, and also undercuts the commitment to biculturalism. That's really troubles me to no regard. For a country that is in 2015 still thinking in those terms. Now, just to shift gear from sort of a precis that we have had about mainstream media, shall we move on to talk about new media? Yeah. Rob, can I begin with you?
Oh.
General impression of how new media is serving Maori communities in reflection of that 40 years, and probably we can take that question across.
Yeah, look, I think it's, as I say, I'm sort of not hugely familiar with some of the formats, but I am quite excited about the potential for new media. We have seen, I know that Māori have really grasped it. We saw with Te Karaka that they like you've experienced with Mana Magazine, they've connected to young Māori pick up modern forms of communication really quickly, and it's I think it is quite exciting. What concerns me is where do young journalists train in future? How do there was a pathway through the newspaper industry before they started. They're not employing young journalists a lot. They expect people to come in, hit the ground running, to be very capable, to be able to work. It strikes me that maybe new media, and my fellow panellists will probably have a better idea of this than I have, but maybe new media will be able to pick up, encourage and train young writers to learn the skills that they need to communicate. That's probably my biggest concern in the industry, is to see the doors closing faster than they're opening, especially for young people. So,
I mean, the best development in Māori writing, Māori journalism, long-form journalism that I've actually seen over the last couple of years has come from bloggers. Morgan here, there's another blogger called Graham Cameron, who I've recently started working with. It's a platform, I guess, that allows young Māori writers who are passionate about a certain aspect of justice or social development or Māori culture, where you're just sort of given free rein to express yourself, then you can share with like-minded people, other academics, and that through that platform I've seen just some astounding ideas come through which wouldn't have had anywhere else, to be aired. I can't imagine most of the stuff that I've seen just on personal blogs would be published anywhere. But yet, when you pour that much passion into a subject and write about it and then share it, you just see these blog posts just get shared far and wide, because the audience is there, but there's not necessarily anyone to aggregate it. So while that's where I've seen a lot of this incredible writing development, I also can imagine that it's quite a lonely form of development, because you're basically, you're not being mentored, you're mentoring yourself, and then you're just sort of sitting back and waiting to see what the rest of the community thinks of it. I mean, has that been your experience of sort of the blogging community?
Yeah, pretty much. There's an element of luck as well. If you're a blogger, and you might get spotted, but you might not. The chances are you're not going to get spotted, so you're never going to have the opportunity to develop under a mentor or develop with a good editor. But one of the really promising things is the new vibrant Māori community on Twitter and Facebook. There are some amazing little communities on Twitter and Facebook, which really we probably haven't seen before. They certainly weren't on the letters to the editor page 10 or 20 years ago. So it's a really exciting new development, and I think there's a lot of potential there for people to branch out from that short form on Twitter and Facebook, and then possibly branch out to blogs, or like Graham, branch out to Mana. So yeah, but it is still a challenging time, because like Rob was saying, those old opportunities, those certain pathways that used to be there 10, 20 or 30 years ago don't exist anymore. So I got picked up just out of pure luck, pretty much, or basically I was loud enough to be seen. So yeah, it's a precarious environment to be in.
Sure, absolutely. I think you're absolutely right about the precarity of blogging and the hope that someone picks you up, because the absence or decline of institutional mechanisms and support is quite significant to training creative young Māori men and women. Yeah. Rob, can I go back to you then? It seems like the panels do see a lot of potential in new media for young Māori women and men. What kind of concrete potentials do you see here? Because blogging is isolated, like you said. What concrete opportunities can we think through, or even suggest that for the media structures to be revitalized?
Yeah, actually, it's a question I wonder about, you know, will we see new media evolve and portals, or excuse the language, I'm out of my depth here, but whether portals develop where there isn't an exchange. I think I've seen something sort of similar working in the universities where young Māori students are working with the Runanga on research projects, and there is a really sort of tight exchange. They communicate very, very effectively between themselves. I don't quite know how it works.
Sure.
You know, whether that's, I think that's where the potential is, whether there's something totally unseen that we not quite aware of now, but new portals developing. I think it was like Morgan said, that communication is quite spectacular when you see they bypass the traditional media systems and they're now dealing directly, they're dealing with each other, and working. What I've seen through a bit of work I've done with the university here is this incredible connection between scientists, between researchers, between people in the Runanga on the ground and actually working together on a research project. Fantastic communications, and moving very fast, protecting fisheries, doing some outstanding work. Probably another similar thing would be in the business. There's business organisation at Otago University that works with Māori commerce students, and to see them being mentored by business leaders. Sure. You know, the communication there, I can see building on areas of research into fisheries, business schools. That's where I see the potential. A little bit loose, but...
A good point, really, in terms of the kind of concrete examples of where such interfaces between young Māori and new media has actually worked. Leonie, do you want to speak to your own sort of concrete instances of this?
The platforms that I see a lot of potential for both young Māori talent and for young Māori audiences, actually I'm going to embarrass a couple of my fellow panellists from yesterday. So the Pantograph Punch and the Wireless are two online-only platforms, and the editors of both are sitting right over there. Pantograph Punch leans more toward a sort of a literary kind of event, covers a lot of the arts, poetry, those kinds of things. And then the Wireless is Radio New Zealand's youth platform, which involves a lot of interactivity. There's different components to each story, not just written, but there'll be like recorded or video components. And I know both of those platforms are also committed to including more cultural content. And so you've got to sort of appeal to the young person as well as the Māori person, and this is where media for young people is heading. Because, that all eyes are on screens. That doesn't necessarily mean that the content that they want is any more shallow than like a long format piece in a magazine. It just means that they've just grown up used to different kinds of media and access to different kinds of media more immediately. And those are really great platforms for young people and for Māori. The next step from there, I think, would be really cool. Would maybe to see a platform like that rise up that's specifically for young Māori, for sharing stories via radio, video, written, across all those platforms, kind of like they tried to do with Paul Henry, but not in any way involving Paul Henry.
What do you want to see?
I think I want to note that old media isn't exactly dead. I think a lot of New Zealand's best writers are coming up through obscure publications like the New Zealand Drug Foundation's magazine, which pays ridiculously well. And there's also a lot of magazines and newspapers in the union movement where there are a lot of good young radical writers coming up that are paid well. So those opportunities still exist, just not in the quantity that we saw 10, 20, 30 years ago. It's an interesting sort of fusion. We're kind of at a halfway point between a transition from that old media to new media, where new media is providing all those opportunities that were once there. We're not there yet, but it'll be interesting when that kind of, when new media starts to dominate, I think.
That's right. That's right. Can I just come back to a point that you made, that the young Maori men and women we are thinking of as both users and audiences are first and foremost also young.
Yeah.
So in a sense, their consumption is actually quite no different from
Yeah.
Pākehā or non-Maori.
That's right,
youth,
yeah.
So I think that's quite an important point you make, that we don't want to think that, sort of cultural training and
Yeah.
or cultural knowledge sharing is the only, because there are other modes of consumption taking
Yeah.
place,
But again, it's easier to engage with a young Māori person when they see their culture reflected in what they're experiencing as well.
For sure,
Yeah.
for sure. Because there was I was just, did some research on before this panel and found that there was a 2008 report produced by the Ministry of Culture and Heritage and Tipuni Kokiri, which found that young Maori new media users actually do demand Maori-specific content, around the whanau, culture, community practices. So I think that's a key thing. Probably it's a tip that mainstream media can take as well, in terms of their own need to reach out to audiences for advertising dollars. Yeah. Well, seeing the kind of positive optimism that we have, what do you think are the challenges for young Maori in relation to new media?
From my point of view, the challenges is it's always going to be funding. The challenge is that's always going to be the first hurdle. There's not a heck of a lot of government funding available for the written word. There's plenty available if you're writing about the arts, and there's plenty available if you're looking to develop a web series or video content. And as we all know, there's always lots of funding available for TV and radio. I mean, not lots by a lot of standards, but lots compared to how many funds are allocated to writing. So, Māori print has to fund itself in exactly the same way as every other kind of print publication. We rely on ad sales, and not many people in, say, the sphere of advertising, like product advertising, not many companies or brands see Māori as an important audience to them. So the majority of our funding for mana comes from the education sector.
Right.
Otago University is our best advertiser. And it comes from government departments, from Ministry of Social Development, from Ministry of Health. There's a lot of there's a lot of funding available to those kinds of groups, and then they funnel their advertising into us. But there's not really any money available outside of that. So yeah, from an economic point of view, that's always going to be my biggest hurdle. But after that, I feel like the world is our oyster. Yeah.
Absolutely right. I think funding is key. Morgan, you're going to say?
That difficulty finding funding has big implications for individual writers who find it harder and harder to make a living now. They're having to work longer. They're having to work for less.
That's right.
And writing has always been a precarious profession, but it's certainly much worse now. Institutions aren't even able to support themselves, let alone writers. So it's a very difficult future, and I have no idea what the solution is.
Sure.
It's
Rob?
a difficult environment.
Yeah, well, as a freelancer, I can say that since I stepped out of mainstream, I figure as a freelancer I work twice as hard for half as much, but I notice that a lot of newspapers, magazines, what concerns me is that the focus, the target for advertising these days, they're hitting the big targets. The target is who's spending money in newspapers at the moment in advertising, and it's the big corporations, it's the big business. The magazines, newspapers that are surviving are the ones that are targeting stories that actually appeal to business stories as good for the trade.
Absolutely.
Some of the people who are spending money in business, they may not be interested in Māori issues and social issues, you know. In fact, that's what we see, that's what I see every day of the week when you look at the stories that are hitting it and trying to twist an editor's arm to actually accept a story that is in the fringes, you know, working in the fringes, doesn't attract them a lot unless they see that it appeals to their advertisers.
Absolutely.
It sounds a bit negative, and I apologise for that, because, but boy, it's a battle. It's a battle to try and sell a story, and that's why we end up working with specialist Māori publishers like Te Karaka and Ngāi Tahu, because that's where they're still receptive to ideas. It doesn't seem to be as relevant to them that your story may not sell a lot of magazines or whatever. It doesn't matter so much. Yeah.
There seems to be quite significant industrial, institutional barriers towards this. It's what comes through in your discussion. You know, I just want to share with the audience that just before coming up here, we sat for about 20 minutes and chatted, and we found out that Creative New Zealand, was it Creative New Zealand, Morgan?
Yeah.
That funded Overland,
Yeah.
the Australian progressive magazine, for essays on Indigenous issues.
Yeah, they run essays, fiction and poetry.
Whereas, you know, Mana, who's had such a long history in Aotearoa, has never got funding from Creative New Zealand, you know. I mean, this is
Not for
quite...
lack of trying either.
Sure, absolutely. Absolutely.
We're like this, every funding round.
That's right, knocking all the time.
This time.
So, you know, conditions of precarity, as well as you spoke about, you know, the kind of exploitation of labour in the new media world and advertising. Rob, just wanted to ask you to share with the audience, actually, you know, you talk about advertisers not wanting to put their money into sort of Maori-specific issues where that's being covered, or Maori media itself. You had an interesting experience with your own editors in trying to get a key issue around, was it Oregon, Tiffany Reagan's? Yes.
Right.
Perhaps you could share that as to show that, you know, historically, perhaps the media was more progressive.
Yeah. I just shared with these guys earlier. It was back in the 90s, and the treaty negotiations was early 90s. Treaty negotiations was a big story, really polarised New Zealanders. I was working as a feature writer at the time, and I interviewed Tipini O'Regan before he was knighted, and I walked into an interview with the man himself, and he has a real inimitable style. He had his pipe and he was puffing on his pipe, and this is in a house in Fendleton somewhere, and he introduced himself, and then he marched up and down, and he marched through the house, his voice booming through the place, and he proceeded to tell me how New Zealand media had treated Ngāi Tahu, and he let rip. He honestly let rip. I recorded it faithfully, and I thought, what have I stepped into here? And it was a real barrage. And he was right. You know, I'd worked in the industry, probably a little bit protected, a little bit sheltered from the reality of it, but he was right. So I went back to work and I wrote a feature that really outlined some of our failings as media to actually give Ngāi Tahu a fair hearing, you know, and he explained quite strongly that we were wrong and we hadn't even listened. So I wrote the story that was pretty punchy. It was one of the better things I've written in my life. Full page feature, 2 articles I think, and it was laid out on the as a feature page, the main feature. My editor saw it, and I knew he wasn't happy about it. The newspaper owner saw it. I knew they weren't thrilled about it, and but to their credit, this was a very conservative newspaper. They published it, and I've been working on the fringes ever since. So what does that tell you?
Thanks for sharing that, Rob. That's quite a significant story in relation to, you know, where newspapers are today as compared to then, the kind of, you know, issues that continue to animate the kind of young Maori new media interface around funding, precarity, advertising. So perhaps we can open up to the audience and respond to a few questions. Yeah? Yes, yeah, oh, jeez. I didn't even finish my sentence. Please go.
No, I'll go first, because your question's probably better. I kind of chatted to Leonie about this a little bit the other night, but being from a publication, I've been looking for young Māori writers with it. Sorry, I've kind of stolen your question. And I find it hard to find great people. I think I also study, sorry, I did steal your question. I also study out at MIT in South Auckland and can see that there's a whole lot of talent there, but I think it's, and I may actually be saying the words from your mouth, it's talent disenfranchised by the media, who just don't feel that they can cross that bridge and engage. Like, even if I reached out and said, hey, I'd love for you to write a piece for the Pentagraph Punch, I just don't know that they actually would. And I'm wondering, I guess, do you want to finish? how to kind of develop that relationship and where we can look to find people. I guess that's the question.
Yeah.
For me, most of the writers, both new and experienced, have come to us. So I tried very hard to just scour the nation for excellent Māori talent when I first took over at Mana, and just no one wanted really anything to do with it. But maybe since we've sort of started to grow stronger as a presence in Māori media, that it sort of attracted a lot of talent to us. But it might be the same for all media, like the young talent that's come to us that's passionate about Māori journalism have been real go-getters. So, I mean, I still don't even know. I mean, I know they do Māori media, Māori journalism papers at most of the journalism schools, is that right? But I think as far as broadcasting goes, or as far as Māori journalism goes, Māori are quite attracted to television and broadcasting because we're natural orators. And I mean, if you sort of think about it historically or culturally, the written word is still actually quite a new concept to Māoridom, considering it was only introduced a couple hundred years ago. So I think maybe it's an area of journalism that we're not as comfortable with, or as confident in our abilities, is maybe what I mean. So that's no help to you, because I don't know. But Steve Bornius at Wintec assures me he's got some incredible young Māori writing students, but that also may just be testament to his skills as a tutor.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of good Māori writers. Not necessarily journalists. There are people like Tina Makarete, Hine Moana Baker, who are like absolutely exceptional writers, world-class writers. But to get those sort of people on board, you have to build personal relationships first, which I think is quite a sort of uniquely Māori way of going about it. You can't sort of cold pitch.
Can't just look it up on LinkedIn.
Exactly. So it requires a lot of groundwork, I think, and reassuring people that they're in a safe environment when they write, that when they're published, they're not going to get abused, or whale oil isn't going to run their post and say how wrong they are and what racist they are. So I think trying to create a safe space for them and then try and build a personal relationship is a really
Can I
good way
give some perspective from the mainstream media side of things? So I'm artistically sort of wireless, used to be night extra stuff, and like finding really good Māori issues reporters is really difficult. So I know one young reporter, she had 2 years experience working at Radio New Zealand. Leonie, you know her as well. The New Zealand Herald offered her...
Money? Oh, sorry.
Made a, because you said I can't say how much they offered. They had, offered a ton of money because she was so good, and it's hard to find people out there, talking about journalists rather than commentators so much.
They definitely rise to the top, the confident ones.
So, definitely finding that good reporting talent is really hard. And I think Wintec is probably an exception. So I'm on the Federated industry advisory committee for their journalism school, and they really struggle to get Māori and Pacifica students through, and I think AUT is probably similar in Massey, similar Canterbury, the same, so, and it would be great to see more young Māori getting into journalism.
Absolutely, I think it's a massive substructural issue really in terms of not having access to routes to become creative workers.
I liked that comment about creating that safe environment for people to feel confident to come forward.
Absolutely.
It's made me realise that maybe that's why people are starting to come to us, because maybe we have created a safe environment, and that is maybe an insight for me. I didn't actually think of it in those terms, so that's quite nice.
I think that's probably true too, because there will be a distrust of the mainstream media and the way that
that's
these
right.
issues. Looking at South Auckland, the students at MIT who I've met feel like, for the most part, their community is portrayed really negatively. And so just kind of widens that distance, and they even more they don't see themselves reflected there. So
Sure. And it kind of breaks trust as well, around media communities. Can I just move up there and then come back?
Yeah. Sure. From a slightly wider context, to step back, because what I hear is the challenges that media are facing in general. I work in media also, and I think that what I hear reflected in your kōrero is very similar across the board, across all industries. They're all facing similar issues in terms of pathways through school, all that kind of carry on. And I think to drill down to a Te Ao Māori perspective, I'm struggling to put the question together, but I think at one end of it, it's we've got this huge hack and slash situation taking place from a government level around arts funding, which then trickles down through to tertiary and secondary. And then when I read regularly, because I do a lot of youth development mahi also, and for example, the Northland Advocate ran a story yesterday, I think it was the day before, talking about these truancy figures that have just come out. 85% of all truants in Northland are Māori. So when one of the few things that engage and hook young Māori into an education space, especially not so much tertiary but definitely secondary, as a creative space, a performance-based space. And you spoke about it, Leonie, when you talked about an oral tradition, so a more of a physical space as opposed to more of a sort of theoretical academic space. So when you have a government that is systematically stripping away arts funding from an upper echelon, and we hear a lot of complaints about that from the tertiary sector, as we should, but the impacts that it's having down when we have all these issues with truancy amongst our rangatahi, 1 in 5 of our young men don't hit fifth form, which is a staggering statistic. And then consider that one of the few engagement hooks that you do have is that arts, that performance space, and they're stripping that money out as well. Is it any wonder that we're struggling to find young Māori? And when we do, often they're in an urban context. So often then they're not raised in a traditional space. And then amongst that, you also have the tension between iwi Māori and urban Māori, which again we're seeing play out in the media at present with the fisheries debacle that's taking place, the report that was commissioned, and urban Māori are now going to lose that pūtea, it's all going to go up to iwi potentially. Yeah. What do you think about that? I'm curious. You might be in a good position, because for me it's quite a political context. And I feel like it's an agenda, to be quite frank, but I'm curious about how you see it.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. Changes at the top have effects for people at the bottom. I wouldn't say it's sort of deliberate sort of policy to say we want to hollow out Māori arts. I think it's just when it comes to government priorities, no one's going to have sort of Māori arts funding, or no one's going to have Māori cultural funding at the top of their mind, because there's no political payoff for that. So it's always going to get cut first, like Rob was mentioning earlier about how the first people to go in the newsroom cull are the Māori journalists. So it's whoever's covering the Māori beat, see you later. You're a special interest, we don't need you, we'll stick with the generalists. So yeah, I think it's something that's symptomatic across all of society, I'd say. And yeah, and it is a uniquely political problem. I think getting more Māori in the media is a political problem.
And then I think too, for young Māori in particular, when you have you talked earlier to young Māori in particular, they are drawn to a visual space. The written word is interesting for them, but young kids here, They want instant gratification, and video allows for that. And so when you have your bastion, your Māori television, your space, and then you have this manoeuvring taking place internally. I mean, me Ngārangi resigned just 48 hours ago, and that's like a mic drop moment. You know? She was basically told, this will not run from this perspective, and that's it, I'm out.
And now she works at Radio New Zealand.
and so yeah, well, Carol took it across, because Carol was one of the first to go, right? So yeah, what hope is there then? And does it rest solely on Māori's shoulders? Is it just up to us to make that step forward? Or do Pākehā have a shared responsibility in that? And then where are they in the dialogue?
Oh, kia ora. Sorry, I wanted to add to your that pātai is my name's Migoto, I work for Otago Museum, I'm the curator Māori, so a lot of the mahi that I do I can directly relate to media, publishing and writing, definitely writing, and also engaging with a target audience and general audiences as well. And so we're constantly looking for Māori writers, but also the ones that can address the needs of today's Māori audiences. And so I think there's a couple of things going on where the mainstream journalism needs to be defined in terms of what our needs are as Māori people, but also the Māori audience needs to also be defined. Okay, so the Māori audience aren't just one people. We don't all, I mean, Aroha mai, but we don't all read Mana magazine, and some of that doesn't come across. Some of it, most of it is, but some of it, I mean, if my cousin from back home in Kahungunu picks up, she's going to read 2 pages and put it down, you know? So we have to think about iwi structure, the politics, where we are. I mean, I'm from Hawke's Bay coming down to Ngaitahu, and the politics, the iwi politics are drastically different. So there's a whole lot more money here, there's a whole lot more mahi being done, but in terms of keeping it real, keeping it relevant, keeping it fresh, those skills are a little bit sort of, you know, here and there, so we sort of have to, you're right, go straight to the whānaus, and I feel that, I mean, I don't know, I came here not knowing anybody, and having to approach these whānau about their own stories about their tauka and stuff like that, and it's about taking that step forward, and actually doing the cold calling and kia ora, I'm a Māori person inside this institution, and I would like to talk to you as a Māori to another Māori, basically, and that's where it starts. And we can't expect to turn out all this mahi overnight. You know, we only have our lifetimes in this small stream of mahi, but in terms of what we can start, I think that's the best place to do that. We've got to think about both sides of those definitions. I mean, in mainstream media, there's constantly things like the language, the content. It's so some of it can be really effective. It's irrelevant. I don't relate to the criminals in Marainu and Hawke's Bay because I lived in Hawke's Bay, but I wasn't one of those. And so it's kind of how do we address those specific audiences inside the Māori audience group, but also how do we address those things in the mainstream journalism sector that can help turn those things around slightly. So the language stuff, making sure we spell things properly, making sure it's the right iwi that's being spoken to, making sure that it's hypersensitive to what they're going to read. You know, one ngaita who picks up the newspaper, they're going to get offended, you know, type thing. So I don't know, I think that's something to think about, the definitions of both of those opposition parties, you know. And then, I mean, constantly at the museum we think about that all the time. Devil's advocate, what's going to happen, but what can we do in this right now, type thing. So, yeah, kill that.
Yeah, thanks.
I
very
mean,
much.
yeah, you asked, like, whose shoulders does the responsibility rest on to change the path of Māori media? And the answer is it rests on Māori shoulders, because any changes that we need to see in anything, it's always achieved better when we take responsibility ourselves. And which isn't to say that the path forward is a clear one, especially as you say with, you know, arts becoming less and less a priority in school curricula. But it does come down to paying attention to the particulars and ensuring that the mahi is done through a Māori lens by Māori and on our own terms. And then I think if you just stick to that path, then change comes regardless of what is happening in the mainstream.
And there's definitely a niche I mean, there's definitely the need, we know what the needs are. It's just putting those people in the right places who can write to, I used to write letters to the Dunedin going, hey, the name of my tupuna's name was spelled wrong, can you fix it please? And just from this point on, sweeties, it's okay, look, I know you've just gone to print, but I'm just telling you now, type thing. And those are huge steps for, in a non-offensive way as a young Māori writer, but also that Māori audiences today were different to Māori audiences 20 years ago, and the turnover of that change is so quick. Even 5 year differences between Māori audiences 5 years ago and Māori audiences today, it's totally different. So we have to stay relevant all the time,
Police it.
Yeah,
That's right.
totally.
I saw a petition recently for the New Zealand Herald to start including the macron in Māori. And that felt like a really huge move to me, the fact that people were asking for that. New Zealand Herald didn't respond in any way to it, but the fact that it was a question that was being asked, that was something that people were demanding from our largest media outlet, it felt incredibly promising.
Did they not?
No.
But also give them the font that gives the macron. There are a set amount of fonts that do macrons and a lot of them don't, so
Yeah,
make sure they use
it's
one.
not
That's
hard
right.
to find one that does
That's
though.
right. That's right.
Yeah.
So I think we're just about on time, or just over time, I think. Is that, but it's about 10 past. Sorry, I kept looking at you two. Can I just say that between the conversation that just took place, between your comments and Leonie's response, I think you mapped the complexity of the matter between institutional funding, truancy in schools, health of Māori children, education, opportunities, sort of recognition of diversity within Māori, recognizing specificities. I think what's required, and Leonie's absolutely right, I have to totally agree with you, that the task falls on Māori's shoulder. One would hope this was not solely the case, but this is where we are in 2015. And what's required, I think, is a very much a massive, complex map that links these various institutions, school conditions, housing, health, opportunities, in a very complex way to think about ways in which we can address the so many different ways in which young Māori's participation in new media is both fully of potential and also hindered by so many different situations and institutions. So on that note, perhaps I could thank Morgan, Leonie, and Rob for a wonderful and fascinating discussion, and yourselves for coming along to the panel and for supporting the New Zealand Young Writers Festival, which has put on the panel. So on behalf of all, thank you very much, and hope you have a brilliant day.
Kia ora.